What I wanted to just explore a little bit is to sort of transition from perhaps more of the science around development, which I know far less about than many of you in this room and my distinguished fellow panelists, to the story of development. And I will look at some threads of spirituality in the midst of this tapestry, if you will. Part of it is just looking that we know that spirituality is certainly not sufficient. It's not the whole story. It's probably not the main part of the story. But it is an integral component that we need to address. We need to understand certain aspects of where people that we are accompanying, that we are attempting to walk alongside in developing contexts, the place of faith and spirituality to them. And I want us to understand spirituality, and for the purposes of this conversation, to really be about one's highest aspirations, one's deepest meanings, longings, fears. It's really that inner person, that inner part, what some would call the soul. And we all have some expression of that, whatever our faith or non-faith perspective is. There's some element of spirituality that I think is a sacred space for each one of us and for our neighbors. So this is a bit about honoring and understanding the complexity of that. Some of spirituality can be very healthy. Some aspects of it can be torqued or contorted to be unhealthy. And rather than threads of a tapestry that cover, can bind people, or at least the garb or cloak that is shrouded in what's called spirituality may actually be used to oppress rather than uplift. And I think we want to tease those things out a little bit in our development work. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of the hopeful aspects of this. If we're looking at multidimensionality, we really need to understand poverty in the context of people, persons individually, but not just the atomistic individual, but really the ecology of relationships, if you will. Mother Teresa had a provocative statement when she said, "We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless." And it certainly is that. It has its material dimensions, and if someone is homeless, we need to ensure that they have shelter. If they're hungry, we need to feed them. But there's also something more. She says the poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. And so there is an aspect of the spiritual, of stigma, of meaning, of being an outsider or an insider. And I think we want to embrace people in an understanding of inclusive spirituality as part of the human family. And Martin Luther King Jr. had an interesting way of looking at this in understanding that how we are all knit together. He said, "We're all tied together in a single garment of destiny, an inescapable network of mutuality. I can never be what I ought to be until you are allowed to be what you ought to be." I think it's important for us as we delve into some stories that we understand that really in this enterprise that we call development, it's not about us and them, right? It's about us. It's about all of us in all of our brokenness and all of our brilliance coming together and sort of throwing our lots in together, learning from one another on this mutual journey of understanding what it means to be more fully human. And for some, that's espoused in self-actualization, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But instead of it just being about us and our own little pyramid where we want to express ourselves and attain, it's about interlocking these pyramids into one another to build something greater than ourselves, where as we serve the needs of our brother and our sister, we're honoring them, we're also fulfilling something of ourself. Some of the stories that I want to look at that give me both cause for concern, but also some places of inspiration. Start with a young boy named Philip, who was a child soldier. He was actually on his way home from school one day when some soldiers actually kidnapped him and beat him and forced him into fighting as part of the Lord's Resistance Army. They took him deep into the bush, beat him with thick sticks to within an inch of his life. The head soldier said, "Hey, since you survived this beating, you'll be a good soldier." Imagine for a moment entering into the world of this 11-year-old boy when not too much longer, at one point after he was forced to fight and kill other people, to loot and pillage and raid villages, one day he was brought into the presence of Joseph Kony. And this little boy, looking at this man who was presiding over this marauding regime, said, later, he said, he's not human. He has evil spiritual powers. And to this day, I still feel some of that evil within me. That was his perspective, his experience. How are we going to meet the needs of this boy where his soul has been put through this devastating experience? I would submit and propose that merely meeting his material needs, merely giving him a good education is not going to be enough to get to the deep reformation, healing of his understanding of what it means to be a boy, later to be a man, what it means to be a member of his community when this is the experience that he has been forced through. One day, recognizing if he stayed, he'd surely die, he escaped and lived in the bush for months, eventually making his way back to his village. But his mother had died. The villagers wouldn't welcome him back, and now he thinks only of suicide and how to end the pain in his life. We were just looking at Ebola in Sierra Leone. Imagine you're living in a slum in Sierra Leone in the midst of this crisis. You see people all around your community dropping like flies. There are hundreds and hundreds of orphans, but people are so fearful to take them in because of the disease. There are many rumors spreading throughout the village that Ebola is a curse or a spiritual disease, and it's been sent as a plague, and the only way to cure it maybe is with some holy water. Unsure what information to trust or who to turn to, you have no idea how to keep you or your family safe. So you retreat inwardly. Of course, there are spiritual dimensions or religious teachings where people want to honor the traditions of their ancestors and bury people, and yet this is spreading the disease. So how do you get through to people finding themselves in this desperate situation? Lastly, let me share a story of a woman suffering from fistula in Ethiopia. Sachet, 17 years old, recently married and expecting her first child. She was actually cast out from her household from a disagreement with her family. Her husband leaves her. During a traditional birth at home as a young mother, complications ensue, the baby dies, and she now suffers with double fistula, leaking urine and feces. And here she is a pariah now in the community, outcast socially and marginalized because of the smell and this experience. No one wants to be near her. You know, there's something more here, more fundamental happening to her. And she begins to internalize this and feel that she's cursed. Cursed by God and outcast. How does she go through this? And how do we as development practitioners engage and help her in a journey of transformation and healing? She said, I wanted to die, begged God to take me, believing he had cursed and punished me. In these contexts, what does holistic development look like? Well, I'll skip through sort of the development of development theory over time, just to say that I think it really has to embrace the science and the story. It has to be about these human relationships in all of their complexity. And we've got to meet people where they are and help them walk along the journey to where they long to be. In thinking about the whole person in the context of his or her societal or social relationships, we want to look at a little bit at the aspects of spiritual development to engage with people's highest aspirations and deepest fears, especially in contexts where, for many people in developing contexts overseas, spirituality is of primary importance to them. They see the world not through a primarily material lens, but a spiritual one. Well, World Vision has sought to engage in some of these situations by drawing close and engaging in this journey of healing and transformation. Transformation of the entire experience, ensuring that, yes, there's appropriate medical attention and care, and that there are interventions in education that go on to help address these material and learned behaviors, but also a transformation of soul, a place of healing. After returning to his village, Philip was able to attend a children of war rehab center in Gulu. There he received therapy, counseling, and the psychosocial support to deal with some of the trauma of the war. But there, as he also describes, he found the beginnings of spiritual healing and started the trek of recovery. He still struggles with what he would term inner demons and pain for what he's been involved with and what's happened to him. But he's found a place of grace to begin to rebuild his identity, his life, and his way forward. And embraced in this atmosphere of love and dignity, he is now a father, and he's leading his own children in a new understanding of what it means to be human. In Sierra Leone, we worked with a project model called Channels of Hope, where we engaged faith leaders in the community who sometimes had their own misperceptions about what the medical issues were. And equipping them with the right information, we saw experiences of imams going into Christian churches and sharing, and pastors going into different temples to be able to talk about how, and mosques, to be able to talk about how there are actually medical ways forward. And people in the community began to trust their leaders and began to behave in better hygiene practices and things that would help the disease begin to subside. It also began to bridge hope and connections between communities that were largely fractious and separated. There was this quite an account where this imam was in a Christian church, and people in the congregation were just floored that there was this sense of harmony coming out of a devastating time of loss. Finally, with Sihe in Ethiopia, who had lost everything and believed that somehow she was being punished from on high, we can see that the healing of the whole person is needed. You have to address the medical issues, absolutely. We've got to speed those efforts in. But she was involved in an area where they were getting some medical attention. Others around her were cured. She sadly was not. But she was also living in a community for about a month together with others where they were in a situation where she would later say, after being taught literacy, income-generating activities about MNCH health, she got some counseling and spiritual care. Then she began to go out and lead other young women in the community. And to this day has helped 24 other women go and get the medical attention that they need, birth healthy babies, and they're thriving and surviving. She says, I no longer feel cursed, but I am blessed. And I would say she's actually a blessing to others in her community. And this perhaps completes the circle of development as we look at the different strands, that what it means to be human. We want to address the material needs, absolutely. We will also want to understand, especially in places of great trauma, of great loss, of great desperation, that we want to reach the deepest places of people, not by imposing anything, but by offering perhaps, like the fragrance of a rose, something that might give people a whiff of hope, a sense of inspiration that together we can be stronger as we embrace one another as broken and wounded healers. Together we can make this world a better place.